Welcome back everyone to another Company of Heroes 2 replay cast. And this time we're gonna have a pretty special little episode. Because this is somebody's first ever Company of Heroes 2 game. It is Runo. He uploaded it to Kotu.org, which is exactly the thing that you should do after your first game. He's playing as the Wehrmacht in Across the Rhine. 2v2 of course. Sam Taylorg. Just gonna call him Sam Taylor. Is his buddy. He's gonna be playing with the Mechanized Assault Doctrine. And on the enemy team we have Young Wright and Young Warlord. I'm guessing that these two are a team. So already that might be a disadvantage for the Axis. Now we have a Royal Engineer and a Airborne Doctrine. So of course we're gonna have lots of infantry and defensive emplacements coming in from the allies, I am guessing. Young Warlord immediately going for Vickers, and his opponent Sam Taylor is also going for an MG42 plus some Assault Grenadiers from the Mechanized Assault. Of course, not as bad as they used to be, but still, in such an open map like Across the Rhine, I really do not like Assault Grenadiers all that much. So what's Runo doing? Well, he's going for the fuel, which is good. At least he seems to understand how important that is. So he's got 2 engineers, which I don't think is really necessary as the Wehrmacht. Because at the start, because you don't really need to build any big buildings. You only have 4 of them, and you build one of them at the start, and then you just retreat your engineers whenever you need to build another one. And plus, the Wehrmacht needs to use their munitions early on to upgrade their infantry, and to also use the rifle grenades and the Panzerfausts. So getting a second engineer to place down more mines at the start for the Wehrmacht really isn't that important. He is, however, going for an MG42, which he probably should have done right at the start, going with an engineer, building the infantry company, and also getting an MG right at the start. That would have been the better build order. Of course, he's also got some Grenadiers. Right now, his Pioneers are getting suppressed, but of course, he's using them as bait. I'm not sure if you can see that, but yeah, there's someone who just talked to me. Anyway, very good flank coming in from the Assault Grens. They managed to take out the MG crew, the Vickers MG crew. They get replaced by the rear echelons, actually, and rear echelons are going to sacrifice the squad to gain control of the MG, so that was a pretty good catch for the Germans. And south, we have a bunker placement from Sam Taylor. I don't think this is a very good decision because he's got a machine gun already covering the area, so he does not need the bunker. Or maybe he was going for the reinforcement point, who knows. Another good flank coming in from Runo, very good. So the Germans definitely getting in some pretty decent early game kills with those flanks. Of course, the MG does get recruited by the riflemen, but the rear echelon squad, that means that it was completely sacrificed in vain. In the meantime, we also have the MG42 from Runo, suppressing down these riflemen. The problem is the MG42 should probably focus fire on the Vickers, because the Vickers is more dangerous than the riflemen. At this point, however, it seems like we have a second Grenadier squad, and Runo has picked the doctrine, the Jaeger armor. I would not pick the Jaeger armor if I was a new player. I would go for a doctrine that has the Tiger. So of course, for a new player, that would mean Spearhead most likely, because the Elephant really isn't the easiest vehicle to use, nor to understand, actually, so I would not have gone for that. But, oh well, it can work, by the way. The strengths of the Doctrine are the spotting scope, because the spotting scope is really, really strong. Whenever you upgrade it on a vehicle, then you get quite the increased line of sight, which for the Wehrmacht is very important. Of course, for anybody is very important. And the Stuka Bombing Strike can be effective against enemy soft targets, emplaced weapons, damaged vehicles, etc. Unfortunately, at this point, these Grenadiers should really be focusing on actually recruiting the MG42 and trying to escape with it, rather than fight at long range with the Vickers and Rifleman squad. Of course, this isn't going to result in a pretty good result for them. We do hear a rifle grenade, so that's a rifle grenade on the Vickers, and the Vickers crew once again goes down. All these machine guns are just going down very quickly, and we have a mortar team, so that's a good pick by Runo. He needs that mortar because, of course, to counter the MG, you need some kind of direct fire and some smoke, of course. Always remember that your mortars can fire smoke, to actually block the line of sight of an enemy unit. And the mortar is being instantly used to pound the Vickers machine gun. Of course, speeding it up because it's pretty slow going so far, and unfortunately for these Grenadiers, they don't really manage to do much. In the meantime, in the south, it seems like the Brits try to push up a little bit, which is a good idea for them, because while they do have the control of both the VP and the fuel point, then we have to think about, well, trying to put some pressure so that Sam Taylor doesn't just shift around and go ahead and attack the center. So if the Germans do double team the center and the Brits come in and actually apply some pressure, that might shift that. However, the problem is MG is doing quite a lot of damage to this 222 scout car by Sam Taylor. Sam Taylor's scout car is going to go down most likely from these infantry sections, and now the Royal Engineers can recapture the Vickers quite easily, so that was completely failed. Here comes the grenade assault from the Assault Grenadiers. 3 grenades are going to get dropped by the 3 men left in the squad. That is not enough to destroy the squad that was manning the Vickers, but it is enough so that the Assault Grenadiers can come in and steal the MG. Interesting, that's a 280 manpower squad used to steal the MG, but the MG is turned immediately around to fire upon these poor British infantrymen who are now trying to crawl through the blasted landscape to try to get to their forward assembly, but the forward assembly doesn't really have anything that can help these guys. I mean, they could try to retreat to break the suppression, but one of the squads goes down. Second squad almost goes down, but the guy decides to retreat back to base because there actually is no forward retreat point. Here also comes a Vickers machine gun, so at this point, we have a bit of an opening for Aruno. He's got an engineer on the left. I would use this engineer, I would take it out of the building, and it would start capturing these points. This is called harassing. Because, of course, whenever you're having troops sitting idle, that's something that, they're not doing that they could be doing. They could have been capturing a point, laying down barbed wire, in this case for engineers, of course, laying down mines, building buildings. So, of course, you could have just plopped them out, even if there were enemy troops here, which is unlikely considering that most of the forces from the Americans were pretty clearly positioned in the center. But even if there were, you could have just retreated the engineers back to base. So there really was nothing to lose to pulling those engineers back and capturing a point with them, a point or two, because of course that would have denied resources from the Allies pretty much for free. And I'm thinking that the squad is going to go down. No, it manages to retreat just at the right time. A very good rifle grenade took out the mortar crew, and at this point there is an ambulance right up to the front line for the Allies. This is very, very risky. If this ambulance is ever spotted... Oh, interesting rifle grenade. Misses completely. But yes, if the ambulance was ever spotted by anything bigger than a Grenadier squad, maybe a AT gun, having it so close to action is very, very dangerous because you can just pull up an AT gun right up to about here and take it out with one shot. In the south, it seems like the Brits are doing fairly well with the support of the Americans, who have stolen an MG42, so good job by Young Wright managing to steal one of those MGs for himself, managing to also kind of set things right in the south. Young Wright is making a pretty big mistake. He's got 135 fuel in the bank, and he's not going for any of the tiers. At this point, going for a tier 2... Ooh, this is also a mistake. Going for a tier 2 with the lieutenant would be a little bit too late, so a captain for the Stuart would be pretty okay. Or even just a captain for the anti-tank guns, and then, whenever you have enough fuel, you go for a major and try to get out of Sherman. Second 222 was definitely a mistake by Sam Taylor. That's like a 30 fuel vehicle, so that's still about a minute of Sam Taylor's fuel income going down the drain, which is definitely not what Sam Taylor wanted to happen, because he's still at phase 2, but he hasn't upgraded, he hasn't built a building. He's going for the phase 3, whereas his ally has gone for the tier 3, the support arm core. At this point, Aruno has gone for a Stug, which is, in my opinion, a bit of a mistake, because the allies were clearly not going for any major vehicles. So I myself would have gone for a Panzer IV medium tank, because whenever you have 43 fuel plus you have built a Stug, that means 135 fuel, so you could have built a Panzer IV. And the Panzer IV it isn't as good as the Stug at anti-tank or anti-light vehicle, but it is much better at anti-infantry, which is what right now Young Wright and Young Warlord are really focusing on, infantry and weapons. So a Panzer IV would have really helped. However, against something like this Bofors, the Stug is definitely, well, good enough, because, well, I'm not sure why he built a Bofors here. Young Warlord putting down a Bofors in a very exposed position definitely doesn't help his cause. He decided to also pop Stand Fast because he, of course, wanted his little Bofors to self-repair, but that's really not enough. Because here comes the Stug, mercilessly. There was nothing the Bofors could do to stop it. Very good play. Noticing that the enemy had an exposed little place to attack in, and of course a decent target, so he just kind of came in and took advantage of that, which is exactly what he should have done. At this point, however, pulling in the Stug that close is a problem. The Stug is an assault gun, which means that it doesn't have a turret. It can only fire what it's looking at, right? So it needs to completely turn the whole tank to fire, which is why using it for flanking maneuvers like this isn't good, because you're moving the Stug into a position where it can be flanked without the enemy even doing anything, and then whenever you're in the rear of your opponents, you're going to have to still turn around before you can fire on them, which is going to take forever, and then you're going to be exposing your rear to potentially more troops coming in from the enemy base, which of course isn't really the best possible option. So that's why also a Panzer IV would have been better, because the Panzer IV would have a turret, and the turret, of course, if you're coming down and trying to flank, it would be looking at the enemy the whole time, firing on them. So it wouldn't need to turn the whole tank around to actually fire, which would mean that it would be less exposed. Here comes a Panzerwerfer by Sam Taylor. Unfortunately for him, it was pretty well aimed, but he didn't pull it in too close. Whenever you have an artillery unit like a Panzerwerfer or a Katyusha that have some pretty pathetic accuracy, you need to pull it in as close as possible so that the radius of the AoE is reduced as much as possible, so that the accuracy is better. That's kind of why you would want to bring it in closer. In the meantime, Aruno has 450 munitions, and he hasn't upgraded his Grenadiers with the MG42 LMG. This is a big mistake, of course, because with the MG42 upgrade, he would be able to defeat the enemy infantry much more easily at long range, because these weapons, they are bad at sort of firing on the move. They don't, have the ability to do that. But if you're standing still at long range, then you have a very good weapon to essentially increase your firepower. At this point, also with 500 munitions available, it would be good for Aruno to go for a lot of mines. In the meantime, a Centaur. This is definitely a bit of a mistake. Now the Centaur is an extremely good anti-infantry vehicle, but whenever there's things like Stugs on the field, Centaur really isn't the best possible option for the Brits. So Young Warlord is probably waiting for the AVRE from his Engineer's Doctrine, which would be a pretty good thing. Every one of the major players seems to be floating tons of munitions, and most of them are also floating other resources. Sam Taylor isn't really, he isn't really floating manpower or fuel because he's going for all these Panzerwerfers. Aruno has a bit of fuel in the bank, which is safe. It looks like the second Stug also died. Not sure where, but yes, probably over here. At this point, if I was Aruno, what would I do? Well, after losing 2 Stugs and knowing that the enemy has anti-tank guns aplenty, I would probably try to go for a tier 4 and try to get out of Brumbear. Of course, that would be very expensive, and that would mean waiting a long time for the Elephant Tank Destroyer. But with a couple of these pack guns, the packs are basically the best anti-tank guns in the game due to their long range, excellent accuracy, and amazing penetration. So at this point, I would focus on keeping the infantry superiority as much as possible, which just kind of went down the drain due to that terrible attack where all of his troops got killed. But still, I would try to rebuild my infantry forces, upgrade them as much as possible, not go for a sniper. A sniper in the late game isn't really all that good. But then try to focus on getting a Brumbear, because that would counter the anti-tank guns a little bit. And of course, go for the Elephant later on, because again, the packs are enough for the AT. against whatever kind of allied armor might be coming out. The reason the sniper is bad in the late game is that it's just one guy, right? He has double, I believe, the HP of a normal infantry guy, so he's gonna take double the hits. But he's still just one guy, and whenever the enemy has something like this, these paratroopers with the LMGs, plus if we're talking this, the 3-inch mortar emplacement, or this, the Centaur attack tank, you have a lot of area effect weapons, high explosive weapons that can just destroy the sniper without the sniper even having a chance to hide, because the sniper may be just like hiding over here randomly. The enemy does not know that he's there, but something else walks around there. He shoots. Then all of the enemy mortars and artillery pieces know where he is, all the enemy tanks, so they all fire about randomly over here, and eventually they're gonna hit and kill him without even him having any chance to get anything done. Of course, he can be fairly good at destroying enemy infantry, but at this point in the game, enemy infantry shouldn't be what you'd be worrying about as much, especially because if you have a decent vehicle force, if you have, for example, a couple of Panzer IVs or a Broom Bear or a Tiger, you don't really need to worry too much about enemy infantry because those vehicles can just kill dozens of troops with just one shot if they're lucky. So that's kind of why. The sniper also doesn't really hide just walking around. It needs to be in cover. So of course, yeah, look at that. Exactly what I was talking about. The mortar just randomly firing in there and dealing a lot of damage, and there goes the sniper. It got one kill for 360 manpower when you could have had a much more resilient infantry squad for 240 a grenadier or 340 a panzer grenadier. So still, not the best possible thing. Here comes the spam of Panzerschrecks by Sam Taylor. This is definitely a not terrible choice because of course that counters the Fireflies from Young Warlord. Problem is going to be emerging when the AVRE Demolition Specialist team is called in, because of course that would be very, very strong against enemy infantry. And yeah, it seems like the Germans have pretty much the VP control. However, really they need to be pushing much more aggressively towards the center. You don't ever really want to give the enemies time to rebuild and just sit around, build up their defenses, get late game armor, because if you do come in and put up pressure, also still there should be some of these units moving around capturing these points on the left because they're completely unguarded. And again, even if they weren't unguarded, it would cost you nothing to just scout around with these troops. If there's enemies, you just retreat and then you bring something heavier to take the area. For example, you bring in a couple of grenadiers. But it's a win-win scenario. Even if you don't capture the point, you still know what is there, and you still kind of tell the enemy, hey look, I'm going to be coming in and trying to take your point. So they're going to be sending more things to actually defend the areas with. Whereas if there are no enemies, you just get points for free. So you get resources for free. So you have more resources to spend on units. At least it seems like both of the Germans really aren't floating all that much. They're floating some fuel because they're losing lots of manpower due to their infantry losses. Okay, so we have Aruna actually upgrading his Grenadiers with LMGs, which is very, very good. At this point, he could also upgrade his P-Grens with some Panzerschrecks. This, of course, would increase his anti-tank capabilities. The problem with this kind of an upgrade is that the Panzer Grenadiers have 4 men, and when 2 are given Panzerschrecks, that means that their anti-infantry firepower is very much worse. So you need to be careful with it. Right now, the Allies do have a Sherman and 2 Sherman Fireflies indeed as anti-infantry. Young Warlord actually has 640 munitions ready, so of course he could use Tulip rockets quite a lot, which means that the Axis need to be very careful about what vehicles they need to build. And ooh, 4 Panzerwerfers, that is way too many. But that does actually destroy all of the infantry units belonging to Young Warlord. He has no more infantry. At this point, if I was Young Warlord, I would definitely go for a lot of sappers. Because, yeah, okay, he's going for some sappers because they're pretty cheap. They're at 210 a piece. So he can quickly build a lot of infantry units that can just run around and cap, and then leave his vehicles to do the hard work. His big problem is that he's lacking anti-infantry, and that's kind of showing with these Panzer Grenadiers just able to walk around and have no fear, because these guys would be very, very vulnerable to some infantry sections with some Grens. Oh, this is not what you want to do with Firefly. Firefly is a tank destroyer. You need to keep it in the back. It's a bit like Ashtu. In the meantime, Aruno does have 335 fuel, so if I was him, I would be focusing definitely on... Also, another thing that I noticed, well, I will be focusing on getting out some vehicles with that fuel. Another thing that I've noticed Aruno doing, which is a big mistake, is he sends in his troops one by one a lot, which is a big mistake because you want to send in your troops all in at once, like a big fist, so that you can get as much firepower as possible on the enemy at once. And of course, if you're going to be sending in troops piecemeal one by one, they're going to be defeated one by one, and that's no use to anybody. If you're afraid of risking more troops to the fight in one go, you can probably take some precautions, like for example, plant some mines around the area in which you're going to be retreating in case you retreat, so that if the enemy vehicles try to chase you down, they're going to hit the mines and their engines are going to get damaged. Or their infantry is going to hit the mines and get, suppressed. Or you place down some of your AT guns or machine guns in the rear, so that if the enemies try to come in, the static weapons can just kind of cover them. We have an elephant on the field. This is definitely going to... not definitely, but I think an 80-82% chance that this elephant is going to die. And the reason is there are two Fireflies on the field. Fireflies have the Tulip Rocket Strike, which is 80 munitions, and that does quite a lot of damage to basically any vehicle. It doesn't really matter how heavy they are, and it also stuns them up. So this elephant is a bit like a Stu. It can only fire if it's in front of something, if it's looking at something. It can only fire in about like 45-degree arc, maybe 60-degree arc in front of it. So really the big problem with it is that also it is a very, very slow vehicle by itself. It's not very maneuverable. So that, combined with the fact that it can only fire in front of it, means that, of course, you need to be very careful about your flanks. And right now, there isn't really much that can cover the flanks for Aruno, except for, very, very good, these infantry squads. You always want to have your elephant around infantry, because it is very, very vulnerable to enemy infantry. It has basically no capabilities of taking out enemy troops. And also it is very vulnerable to vehicles if they come in from the flanks and rear. And this is exactly where these Panzer Grenadiers come in, because if these Fireflies come into the flanks of the elephant, then the Panzer Grenadiers are going to be able to destroy them. Also, Fireflies are being used very, very badly. The Fireflies against an enemy like an elephant need to be staying hidden as much as possible. They don't want to show themselves to the elephant because the elephant is able to destroy them in 2 shots. What they want to do is they want to wait until the elephant fires at something, and right now the elephant isn't on prioritized vehicles. This is an extremely important button. If you had the elephant on prioritized vehicles, the vehicle would not fire its main gun at enemy infantry. And you may be thinking, well, I do want to kill enemy infantry, but the main gun of something like the elephant is really, really weak against enemy infantry. It does not hit them ever. So it's better to just keep rounds loaded for when tanks are coming in. And where are the Panzer Grenadiers? They came in for the center, and as you can see, as soon as the Panzer Grenadiers left, the Allies took advantage of that, came in with a Jackson and the Firefly, and destroyed the elephant. Now, one of the Fireflies also went down, so that's 2 Fireflies dead for the elephant, which is quite a decent trade in terms of resources for the Allies. But the Axis actually came out on top of that trade because Aruno has enough resources to call in another elephant right off the bat. And still, if I was Aruno, at this point I would go for a lot of Panthers rather than another elephant, because Panther is 175 fuel. So that means that it's about, well, 25 plus 45 equals 70. So it's 70 fuel less than the Elephant Tank Destroyer. It's about 33% less, right? So you can get every 2 elephants you get, you can get 3 Panthers. Considering you're about to get a second elephant, you could have could have had 3 Panthers for the same price. The Panthers are faster than the Elephants, they have a turret, so they're more versatile. They have a Pinto mounted machine gun that they can upgrade. Let me see if I can find... Well, something like this, right? A machine gunner that's standing on top, firing at enemy infantry. So while the Panther's main gun is much like the Elephant, it is very inaccurate against infantry. It doesn't really have HE rounds, so it doesn't do a lot of damage against enemy infantry like something like the Sherman. It can still rack up quite a lot of kills against troops because of its machine guns, which the Elephant, of course, doesn't have. It's one of its main weaknesses. It just doesn't have any weapons that can deal with enemy troops. So if you had 3 Panthers, you would have been able to destroy these Fireflies a little bit more. Well, you would have had a little bit more options to destroy the Fireflies rather than just lure them in and hope that the Elephant can defeat them. You could have taken the initiative and gone in against them, and then you could also use the Panthers to take the initiative against more of their men than you could with the Elephant. However, the Germans seem to be playing fairly well so far. I mean, they do have a fairly solid control over the center and the south, partially because the Allies have been focusing a little bit more on the north lately. And finally, he's bringing in Aruno. He's bringing in his full might of the infantry to actually take some territories. As you can see, this pack gun as well is just is not hitting the machine gun. So you might as well just put it on prioritized vehicles and avoid wasting shots, because at this point it's just revealing its position, and it means also that it's firing at enemy infantry, so when an enemy tank comes in, it's reloading. And so the tank can take advantage of the opportunity that while it is reloading to destroy it, which is exactly what you don't want to happen. Whereas if the tank was on prioritized vehicles, it would be just in an ambush position somewhere, and when the tanks come in, you can destroy them. Tulip rockets being fired randomly. I don't think that Young Warlord really knows how the Tulip rockets work. Well, see, this is exactly what you don't want to do with tank destroyers. You don't want to rush into huge swarms of enemy infantry, because of course they'll get completely overwhelmed, destroyed. They have no weapons that can deal with the infantry, especially anti-tank guns are nasty for any kind of vehicle, and of course they go down in smoke. There is the second Elephant that's coming in for Aruno, and at this point, yeah, most definitely there could have been 3, even 4 Panthers on the field for Aruno if the 2 Elephants hadn't been called in. And the thing is, what you always want to do is you want to assess what the enemy has, what the enemy might get, your resources, and then decide what you're going to go for. Because you can see that Young Warlord and Young Wright are going for a lot of tank destroyers, right? They have a Jackson, they have lots of Fireflies, so they're really focused on anti-tank. And what that means is that they're not as focused on infantry. So having a vehicle that can only deal with enemy tanks isn't really all that important whenever their tanks can't deal with your infantry. Because if the Panzer Grenadiers were to walk up to the Firefly, there would be nothing that the Firefly would be able to do against the infantry. So you already don't need the anti-tank capabilities as much, because the enemy isn't as friendly. So you might as well just go for a unit that is more, I guess, a jack of all trades, that can deal with the enemy infantry as well as dealing with the enemy vehicles. And of course you can also bring in the calculation about the resources, because of course the Elephants are more expensive than most other vehicles in the game. So sort of purchasing a more expensive vehicle to counter enemy units might sometimes lead to, you know, unfortunate situations where you just lose them. And of course you're losing a more expensive unit than the enemy. That's not good. Okay, Vickers machine gun on the left side, capturing the point, and the artillery, very, very good barrage coming in from all of the Panzerwerfers. This huge amount of artillery kind of, ironically, is very, very important right now for the Germans, and we do have a Brummbär, so at least Aruno does go for a anti-infantry unit, but he still hasn't placed his Elephant on prioritized vehicles, which is very, very bad, because right now, if I switch to the view of the Allies, if I turn on the Fog of War, as you can see, the Allies know that the Elephant is shooting them, so they know that the Elephant is here. So if I were the Allies, I would do something not like this, but not like this, but I would try to go around, for example, the south here, so that we have more things in the way that's blocking the line of sight. Or I would go around the north over here to go around the elephant. Of course, what they're doing is perfectly fine, but it's a little more dangerous than doing a better flank. Also, that would have allowed them to avoid these anti-tank guns or knowing that they were there. And as you can see, the elephant goes down. Well, it may not go down. Was that a mortar that killed the... It doesn't have any vehicles destroyed, so it might have not been the mortar, but still, your elephant almost died because it was shooting at the infantry when it could have been avoided. Because if the elephant hadn't been shooting at the infantry, it would still have been hidden, and so the enemy vehicles wouldn't have come in. Also, the Brits made a huge mistake because they didn't just... Well, they could have just kept their Fireflies here, opened up with a barrage of tulips on the elephant, stun it up, and then go in. That would have been a pretty okay little tactic there. But yeah, I'm guessing that the Germans will not be winning. They right now have a triple cap going, which means that these VPs are going down at thrice the normal rate. Because if you have 2 victory points under your control and your opponent has 1 victory point, the way the victory point losses, the ticket losses are calculated is that you have 2, they have 1, 2 minus 1 equals 1 every 3 seconds. Whereas if you have 3 VPs and they have 0, 3 minus 0 equals 3. So 3 every 3 seconds, aka 1 per second. So it is very, very rough to be under a triple cap. You want a triple cap... Oh, there goes the elephant. Unfortunately, that's because you have no engineers, which is a huge, huge mistake. You always want to have engineers up as much as possible. At this point in the late game, I know I said that in the early game it wasn't good for the Wehrmacht to go for 2 engineer squads, but in the late game, you want to have 2 or 3 engineer squads up at all times because they do a lot of things. They repair your vehicles, they can be upgraded with minesweepers. Now, your opponents are placing down mines, but mines are very important because they use up extra munitions and they are able to immobilize enemy vehicles, damage them, kill enemy infantry while they're pushing, etc., etc. So mines always pay off. Well, not always, but most of the time pay off. So having, or something like this demo charge over here, having a, well, this one's going to blow up on its own, and unfortunately it does not destroy the unit. Because that was the airborne demo charge, which is a weird one. Anyway, you have minesweepers, so you can detect enemy traps, like demo charges and mines, and you can then disable them. Then you can also use engineers to capture enemy points whenever your more important units are busy fighting. So of course, the engineers who aren't quite as powerful as other troops in a straight-up fight, they can be used to capture points while other units do other things. And then you can also upgrade them with flamethrowers to defeat enemy troops in buildings or heavy cover, because flamethrowers have a bonus towards enemies in heavy cover. So they're pretty good for clearing out enemy fortified positions. Then you can also use engineers to scout, because they're pretty much expendable. So you can place them around the map and do your bidding. You can also use them to recruit weapons, because whenever a weapon team is destroyed, you can recruit it. Or rather, whenever a weapon is decrewed, you can place a new crew on it. And if you do it with something like this Panzer Grenadier squad, let's see if I can show it to you. No, I cannot actually. Can I show it to you in any way? Is anybody up for reinforcements? Well, if you do it with something like a Panzer Grenadier squad, you're going to have to be reinforcing it. So whenever you are back at base, I'll show it. And the cost for reinforcing each man is detracted from your manpower pool. And engineers, being cheaper units, as you can see, 200 manpower instead of the Panzer Grenadiers of 340, cost less to reinforce. So of course you would want to put your engineers as the crews of weapons, because then you can, whenever you can pull them back, instead of paying 34 to reinforce, which is 340, so 1/10 of the cost of the squad. Although the calculations for these things are complicated sometimes. It's not 1/10 every time. Yeah, instead of paying 34, you could be paying a lot less. Very good Stuka Strike, by the way. You could be paying a lot less. Now, I don't have a point of reference for a German engineer right now, but yeah. And, of course, first and foremost, whenever you have a vehicle, you want to repair it. You want to repair it. Because, of course, if you're sending in your vehicle with half of its HP bar already depleted into the battle like this, it's going to die twice as quickly. And of course, that's a waste of resources. In the meantime, also, the Allies might win. If the Allies do send one of these engineers down to the south, there's nothing there to protect the south. And so, of course, here comes the huge Panzerwerfer barrage. Might destroy... No, it doesn't. Interesting. But yes, if the Allies get a triple cap, the Germans are only going to last like a minute and a half, whereas the Allies have half a minute of VPs left. So the Allies can still very much win this. You never really want to give up in Company of Heroes, and so of course, who knows, who knows. We have a pretty huge swarm of German troops coming down south. Whenever you're at this point of the game, also you don't want to get elephants or something like that, because you want something that's very, very versatile. You're going to be caught up managing different things. Troops capturing points, troops reinforcing back at base, troops coming back from the base and being thrown in the action, micromanaging single troops to use their abilities. So having a very specialized unit like the Tank Destroyer really isn't what you want to happen in the late game. You want a unit that can take care of various different threats and be fairly easy to manage. So again, something more all-rounded would have been better. And here comes the capture in the north. As you can see, there was nothing here, so you could have captured this point something like 15 minutes ago by just sending a random unit there. Of course, they do come in with some infantry to counter it, but you could have forced him to do that much earlier. Here comes, of course, a grenade, and he's going to be able to wipe out one of these squads. He's also, at the same time, pushing in the center. Very good. Sending in one squad to be a bit of a diversion in the north, and be a secondary attack, and then his main attack comes in the center. That was pretty much what you want to do at all times. And of course, that is going to mean quite a lot of points wasted for the Allies. The Allies are down to 10 points. They might be able to capture the center, but the Panzerwerfers come in. This is exactly what artillery is for. 46 kills for the Panzerwerfer. And I'm thinking that this will be the end of the Allies. So very good, very good. We have a Stug E. That's not the best choice. Anyway, I want to thank y'all for watching. I hope it's going to be useful to Aruno, Sam Taylor, Young World Order, and Young Wright. Even though Aruno was the person who was playing for the first time, some advice would be useful for pretty much all these players. Tone down on the TDs, TDs being tank destroyers. Especially if you're a new player, you want something that's a little bit easier to manage, that's not going to take up quite as much of your micro time, because you're still kind of learning things. Be a little bit more proactive with your infantry. Send it around all the time. Create pressure on the enemy. Capture points. Take out structures. These two bunkers could have been easily taken out by just a couple of sappers coming in with Piats. And then just always be a little bit more aggressive is good. With the artillery, the Allies could have gone for some artillery, but the Germans did quite well in going for some artillery pieces. Perhaps 4 Panzerwerfers was a little bit too much, but in the end, it was good enough. So yeah, I'll see you soon.